Welcome to the Friday Power Lunch, a weekly show amplifying the voices of the Virginia grassroots. Each week, we provide engaging conversations about politics, culture, and women making change. Produced by the unstoppable women of Network Nova, our motto is, when we vote, we win. The Friday Power Lunch is recorded before a live Zoom audience. Follow us on social media. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and show us some love and become a sponsor through Patreon. The Friday Power Lunch. Badass women getting things done.
I'm your host today. I'm Catherine White, bringing you the guests, the issues, the action, and we're amplify the grassroots to get things done and make things fun. And we are so excited to bring this exciting episode to you. And the theme is politics, policy, and gender. And today I'm so excited because the guest where I'm going to introduce will really inspire the conversation on why we need to elect more women and the importance of having that diversity and political leadership at the board table and all across in different places of leadership, how it impacts our politics and our policy. And so this is going to be really great. And I just want to say that we will have Representative Abigail Spanberger here. She's from CD7, but she will be coming in the middle of the show, and we're excited to talk to her today. And also super excited to have San Diego City Attorney up there, Mara Elliott. Hello, she is a trailblazer in her field, first woman, the first Latina, first mother to be elected to this position. And we will be talking about with her the impact, the innovative impact she has had on policy. And I am just so very excited because our friend Catherine Reed was elected mayor of City of Fairfax, connected us to the wonderful Bonnie Stabile, the founder and director of the Gender and Policy Center at the Schar School of Policy and Government, called the GAP Center at George Mason University, and also her new book, Women, Power, and Rape Culture. So we're so excited to have the guests here today. So welcome, everybody. And if you haven't been on the show, like I said, we have the rules of the road. We get to a little business before we get going. We are a great community here. We like to keep it friendly, but we like to keep it real. So please use the chat. Introduce yourself. Tell us where you're from, but keep it nice. If you get nasty, we'll just kick you out. And the after chat. After chat's a lot of fun. It starts at 1 p.m. and that's our favorite place. That's where, if the guests can stay today, we'll talk a little bit more to them, but it's really where you get a chance to sort of have your voice heard as well. And we love that part. And lastly, we also want to say, hey, it's holiday time. It's a season for giving, and we have lots of giving for you. Two things: you could become a patron and give to our show and give to us badasses that do the show every week. And thank you to those that are in the room that are our patrons. And also, Robin, if you want to bring up some holiday stuff, it's that time of year, and it's always a good time for swag. So what's really cool is, if you haven't already got it, is our sweatshirts in the Badass Boutique. And our favorite, we voted democracy one because democracy looks good on you. And I can tell you that a lot of people have been wearing it, and it really does look good on you. And I have my coffee cup, which I love too. So there's great gifts in there. There's still time to get them. And even after the holidays, you want to have that mug. You want to have the great show off and message to everybody how important democracy is and how good it looks on you. So thank you. I love it, love it, love it. And when we're talking about this show today, really putting women in charge, we still haven't passed the ERA. Well, we passed the ERA, sorry. I know Lisa Sells is in the room. We passed it. We need to make sure that the archivist puts it in there and records it. So we have a key event next week. The action for the ERA is the March and the Rally. 100 years, ladies and men, gentlemen, 100 years. And we don't want to wait one more freaking year. So join us next Wednesday at noon. And of course, it's called Not One More Year. And so we hope you'll join us for that. It starts off at 9 to noon and at Lafayette Park. And you can read the rest. We'll put that all in the chat. And Lisa Sells is hopefully in the chat to really kind of push that around. So awesome. I am so excited, and I hope we can just get right to the power chat with co-host Fennell Norton. Where you at? Fennell?
I am on my way. Here I am.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, you have your Christmas red on, I see, but it's your mom. What is your top? Is it the mom?
it's my mom's demand shirt. So yeah, I fancy it up a little bit, but yes, it's my mom's demand shirt.
So let's talk about policy, politics, and gender. What is on your mind today about these, great intersection that's so important?
Yeah, I am so excited that we're going to be having this conversation today. And I think it just could not be more perfect. The first thing that is what you already said. When it comes to policy and getting things done, there are real statistics that show that women really do get more done. They really can collaborate more. They can actually work across lines better. They get stuff done. But I think what's even more significant is the kinds of policy that we're going to talk about today. And it couldn't be more relevant when we're talking about wars and what the implications are for women. When we talk about right here locally, yes, in any community, what the implications are to women. So I think that when we think about the importance of the conversation today, that's what I want people to think about when we end this show today. How do these things relate to you? How do you become better at having conversations about it?
Yes, and the city attorney, Mara Elliott, I just love thinking about what she talked about, and we'll hear that today, just the idea of how you can approach policy and being a mom, having kids herself, understanding the violence with gun violence, and then taking that into her job and realizing, about domestic abuse and starting to see this link of gun violence and tragedy around it, and then putting innovative policies around, the red flag laws. I think that's really amazing to see that kind of ability to get that done when you think of policy, politics. And then we talked to Bonnie, who is the founder of this wonderful, the Gender and Policy Center over at George Mason. That variable of gender, what is that about? What does that look like in a patriarchal society? And so I can't wait to talk to Bonnie about her new book. And when we think about, women running for office, what are the kind of things that make it a little different when you put gender in it, or all the research she has around what it is like in that culture and how it affects the politics and the policy. It's just a great flow.
Yeah, it really is. And I love the way that you brought in the politics around it. Because again, statistics do show that women are, I hate to say it, but they're just better. We're just better at politics. And so I'm going to love the conversation that you'll have with Congresswoman Spanberger, because I want to know when she's thinking about running for governor now, what her expectations are, and what is she going to need, and what will it mean for women to think about having a woman in charge in the governorship in Virginia. So I'm excited about that.
We haven't had a woman in the governorship, right? So what will that be differently? And I think too, I can't wait just to talk to her about the shit show in Congress a little bit. I mean, talk about putting a crazy person in charge. Mike Johnson, who spoke, I guess, to God the other day and believes dinosaurs and humans existed together. That's some crazy, wild stuff. And I'm like, this is serious? Because he also believes that women, his main thing he follows is about policy, his policy, Bonnie, as a professor, is the Bible, which nothing against the Bible, but it's not what you should be leading when you're running a government, right? It's like,
oh my God, it is incredible. Some of these things that these folks talk about, it just sort of boggles the mind. And I just have 3 words when they do that, which is, you do you.
I'll do me.
You do you, and let us do us. But I think the other thing that I'm so excited about when I get to talk to Mara is, it's not just the gun legislation that she's focused on. She is such a badass, honestly, she takes care of the elephants. I know you're like thinking, what are you talking about? But I'm just saying that her policy spread is not just one thing. Mm-hmm. She's fearless. I mean, she's done elder abuse, Experian for privacy issues, and really Instacart for exploiting their employees, and then also protecting the elephants, the biggest ivory bust ever in California. I'm just saying, the woman's a badass.
Yeah, and I think that's the link between our 3 guests. Brave, there's a lot of bravery there, and trailblazer, there's that link, right? I mean, if you follow the Schar Center at Policy, and the kind of, when we spoke to Bonnie about her role there and the years she spent there, and she's like, it's mostly men. And that's, again, when you don't have a diversity at the table and have people in the sense that even when you do a research project, you know what I mean? And you approach research, and we've seen that even in the medical field, right? Where they totally leave us out from menopause to different things, and they throw kind of a one size fits all shoe at us. And it's usually been tried on only a man. And then they're like, well, you can take that. And it's like, you know, so I think it's really important when you also have a woman in charge of policy and the I, and then you have a woman in charge in leadership in the city, bringing those values in there and her perspective on that and actually finding solutions. And I can't wait to talk to all of them about this. So yes, I'm very excited. So I'm excited just in general because it is December 8th, and next week we have one more show, and then we're going to be on break, and we will be back in January. Some fantastic guests, and we're going to start a whole new season. So everybody in the room, if you're just tuning in, we're going to keep going. Put a woman in charge, and we've been doing this 3 years, and we're going to have a great show because we have a presidential election to win. We have a congressional, we have a senator to get elected, and in the nation, we're going to be working together. And I'm thinking, is there anything else I'm leaving out? I felt like on your mind.
I don't think you're leaving out anything. I would just say that we're not going to cede any spaces. We're going to be everywhere. We're going to be everywhere, and we will not back down.
Okay. With that, I think we should get the show started. Right? Yes. Oh, and by the way, so I want you to know, like even the holidays, and put a woman in charge. They put this guy in a red suit in charge, and we know that actually who runs all the holidays is us. And happy Hanukkah, by the way, to anybody out there celebrating. We know on our team, there's people celebrating. So yeah, let's start it out right. And just say to everybody, welcome, and let's get this show started.
Wonderful. Well, we're going to bring up Mara Elliott. She's the city attorney for San Diego. I am so excited to have you here. I'm going to start by saying you're the first mom, the first Latina, the first woman in this role. And the other thing that I think is so important that I want to hear you talk about for a minute is what it's like to be first. Now, here's what I want to start with. If anybody's had a chance to read the Washington Post article, which I want them to do, Everybody's Daughter, the rape victim behind Kentucky's viral abortion ad, there is a line in that article where Hadley herself says, had this been a Latina woman or an African-American woman, I don't think that the response would have been the same. So you have some thoughts around being the first mom, the first Latina, the first woman. How do you make all of this work, and how do you do it so successfully?
Thank you, and I'm so happy to be here. Good morning or good afternoon to everybody. I'm in sunny San Diego, and we're still on morning time. I think there's a tremendous amount of pressure to do things well because when you are the first, you have increased scrutiny. And I'll just back up a little bit and explain. I was elected in 2016. And at that time, I was not the person who was invited to the debates. I was not the person who was covered in the newspaper because I was somebody who had risen through the ranks in the office. And with that came the presumption that I couldn't raise money, I couldn't get the endorsements, and I couldn't be viable. So I would say the training started 2 years before I was elected because right away, I think there was an institution saying, who do you think you are? There are 4 others running against you, and we know who they are. They're viable and you're not. And even for some of the endorsement meetings, I'd come in and be belittled for not having the same, viability that our community thought was necessary to win a job like this. But I have to say, women are very focused, and that's just my perspective. And I love that we're not willing to allow others to define who we are. I will admit, because this was a long race to win, we have a very big city. We're the 8th largest in the nation. So that's a lot of ground to cover. And the entire city has the opportunity to elect their city attorney. So you're speaking to a broad population. And it's great training ground because you're hearing from people. What do you want from your city attorney? Typically, the question is, what is a city attorney? What do they do? So just even talking to people and hearing about that was important. There were days when I didn't want to run because I started to hear those voices, the negative voices, and you've got to learn to keep yourself focused and ignore that. But I cannot tell you how many times a little girl came up to me after I'd gone to some kind of a forum or debate and said, I want to be just like you when you grow up. So that's what it's like to be the first, because if you're the first that runs and then you pull out, the message you send to kids all over the place, or women who are thinking about running and just haven't yet pulled together that courage, I don't want to be the one that lets them down. So that's really motivated me for 7 years. I'm not going to be the one that lets them down. I'm going to work every second of the day to be the best city attorney I can. It's a very mom-centric agenda. You hit on some of the most important points, and you can hear the mom throughout that. But this is not just about me. It's not just about my city. It's about my children. It's about protecting my community, protecting my children. And that gives me a lot of courage. So that's what it's like to be the first. You have to really put on your blinders and stay absolutely focused on what you're trying to achieve.
So there are a couple other things I want to get to, and the gun legislation and what you've done will be one of them. But I really do want to hear about, some of these other things that you worked on. When I was looking and doing the research, and I was reading off today all of the things that you did, the Instacart, the Experian, the elephant, the poachers. So just talk to me about any one of those and how you decided to sort of dig into that. How did you get into this other thing that most of us probably wouldn't have thought about?
I think it's staying true to who I am. And these are important issues for me. Focusing on those that are most vulnerable. I love animals. Elephants are my favorite. So when we came across the situation where we found that ivory was being sold illegally, we had this new California law that nobody was using. So I used it, and it sent a very strong message throughout the state of California, because one good prosecution can really change the fabric of our state. And that's what happened there. But I will come across situations where I think I really want to do something about this. I don't know what that is yet, but here's a law, let's try it. And that's how I also came into the gun violence prevention arena. We had red flag laws that had been on the books for a couple of years when I came into office, and nobody was using them. And that was a mystery to me. Why would we not use something that we've studied? We know it's going to save lives. So I took a chance. And I think women are good at taking chances. It's not an ego thing. What we want to do is we want to achieve something. So that's kind of what leads me in that direction: protection, looking for the vulnerable, staying true to who I am.
So let's talk about the Gun Violence Resolution Order, which is pretty significant. And I think that since we're talking about a woman in charge, we should probably talk about some of the statistics that have changed since you started working on this policy. So you want to talk about that a little, because I've got them here, and they're
sure.
they're pretty significant. So you want to talk about that a little bit, how you made that happen?
Yeah, so I didn't think that there was very much we could do at the local level about gun violence. I had always believed this was something that had to be resolved at the federal level. But a couple of significant things happened for me to make this a priority at the local level. One was Sandy Hook, and that was a horrific situation where kindergartners and first graders were murdered, and teachers. I was driving my kids to school that day and dropping them off, same ages, when I heard that come over the radio. And as a parent, you're thinking, schools are supposed to be safe. What am I doing? Are they safe when I let them go today? So that was earth-shattering. That was back in 2012, before I was city attorney. And then we had a mass murder at UC Santa Barbara, where I went to school. And all of the signs were there, all the red flags. This was a white male who felt like women were shunning him. He had exhibited signs of having some mental issues. His family had called law enforcement, and law enforcement said, we can't do anything because he hasn't committed a crime. And the whole purpose of a red flag law is, okay, we see all these red flags. Let's get the gun out of this guy's hands so that he can deal with whatever is making him an irresponsible person. we didn't have those gun laws in place. After Santa Barbara, the state of California said no more and enacted that law. And that became something we can use at the local level. And it's just to recap what it means is if you have clear and convincing evidence that an individual is a danger to themselves or to others, you can petition the court for a gun violence restraining order. And that allows us to remove guns from that individual until they can prove that they are again responsible. So it is not a permanent takeaway of guns. It is a cooling off crisis intervention tool. And it's really important. And so we took a chance, started it right after I was elected. Within a year, I had a program up and running. And we have achieved over 1,000 gun violence restraining orders since I started. And not only have we done well here in the city of San Diego, but we have gotten state grant funding and we've trained over 400 law enforcement agencies in the state of California. Because if the model works in San Diego, that's terrific. But I have neighboring cities that could be unsafe. So what kind of impact are you making if you can't spread that throughout the state of California? And we're getting there. So those stats are really high. Some might say it's successful. I find it terrifying that we've had to intervene that many times, but it's also a relief that people aren't reading about this in the newspaper. And you can't prove how many lives you've saved, but you know you have.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I really hope you can stay for the after chat. The last thing that I'll take my last seconds is there's this Supreme Court case happening right now, the United States versus Rahimi. So can you just sort of take 30 seconds and just sort of tell us what you think the implications of that might be?
Yeah, the implications could be very devastating. So there is a correlation between domestic violence and somebody who possesses an abuser who possesses a gun, and the likelihood of the abused person dying as a result of that gun possession is 500% greater in a domestic violence situation. In Rahimi, we have a domestic violence perpetrator who was also doing a whole bunch of other crazy stuff involving guns. So there is a federal law that would prohibit him from having a gun. And under the Bruin decision, which the US Supreme Court issued last year, the determination is if historically when we adopted our Constitution, the intent was not to prevent people like Rahimi from having guns, then it's unconstitutional. So this is a really important case because the last thing we want is for someone who's a proven menace to society, he is an absolute danger, to have a constitutional right to still possess a gun. So that is what they're going to determine. I did listen in, and I think the court is going to find a middle ground. I don't think that, despite how displeased I am with this US Supreme Court, I don't think they're going to go to this crazy historical basis to determine whether someone should have a gun. I think they're going to say there's got to be some responsibility. So we're waiting to get that decision next year. In the meantime, all of our laws are still in effect. We're always afraid people are going to say, I can't get a gun violence restraining order because it's pending. That's not true. We're still moving as quickly as we can when we hear about potential gun violence.
Wonderful. Well, this has been an amazing discussion. I'm so happy you'll be able to stay for the after chat because I have a lot more.
Okay.
And yeah, there's a lot more to talk about. But in the meantime, I'll let you go and we'll bring up Louisa so that she can give us the update and then we'll keep on with the show. So Louisa, come on up, and Mara, we'll talk a little later.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, there we are. Good to see you, Fanal. And as you know, I mean, this is a fantastic conversation because it really talks about how do we move from electing people to office to supporting them and making sure that we actually get the legislation passed on issues that they ran on. And we have had about 10 meetings this week with both new and repeat legislators in the Virginia General Assembly. We've been talking to them about what their priorities are for our upcoming legislative session. And they've been sharing the real importance that they feel of making sure that Democrats deliver, right? We talk about that a lot, but Democrats ran on some very key values, which you're hearing about already. Mara talked about the importance of gun violence prevention, and I was talking to Dan Helmer about that this morning and the bills that they are planning to bring into the General Assembly this year. So I think we have a really great opportunity. And for those of you who have not gotten involved in legislation yet, I want to say you still have a chance to do so. We have some really great working groups that are part of our coalition. And if you have a particular issue area that you're interested in, please contact the person who leads that working group. I'm going to put their information in the chat. But we have working groups on public education, climate and clean energy, women's issues, gun violence prevention, campaign finance reform, good governance, and we now have a voter readiness working group that is working on making sure that voters are fully informed in a way that will ensure that more votes are being counted and counted correctly in our upcoming elections in 2024. As many of you might know, we had a bunch of issues with provisional ballots this year, and we are trying to be proactive on how we are dealing with letting voters know about their options for voting, but also what is needed for them to be able to register and vote without a provisional ballot. So the other thing I wanted to bring up is this year, in addition to legislation, we are going to be working on constitutional amendments. And this is a great way, if there are people who aren't usually all that tuned in to the legislative session, constitutional amendments are just so important and great messaging tools for getting Democrats engaged. So we're going to have 3 constitutional amendments, and I just want to talk about one of them, which will be on reproductive health. And this amendment is going to ensure that all people in Virginia can make their own decisions about their reproductive futures without undue influence from the government. And it's just, we all know that Democrats were running on this issue this year, and we are so excited about the opportunity in Virginia to start moving forward on a constitutional amendment. For those of you who don't know the process, it's a 3-stage process in Virginia. First, you have to pass the constitutional amendment 1 year with a Senate and House who agree to it. Then you have to have an election for new folks into the House, and then you have to pass it the next year with new House members and Senate members, and then it goes to the voters to vote. The one thing we want to encourage everyone, though, is don't wait until these amendments get to the voters. We need to start talking about them today. We want voters to get excited about them. We want voters to be on board. We want voters to be like just so excited that they're going to have the opportunity to vote in amendments both on same reproductive health, but also there's going to be one on same-sex marriage, and there will be one on the restoration of the right to vote. And so these are all just really important things we want to codify in Virginia law so that they are not things that can be taken away and rights that could be chipped away at over time. So very excited about those opportunities. And I just want to end with, we have some upcoming meetings. So if you are not yet on holiday break and want to get involved before the holidays start, we have a voter readiness working group meeting on Wednesday, this coming Wednesday, a legislative working group meeting this coming Thursday, and the Virginia Grassroots Coalition meeting will be on Sunday, January 7th. But most importantly, on the Power Lunch on Friday, January 12th, we are going to have our press conference where we are going to share more about the priority bills that we're going to be supporting during the legislative session and just chat a little bit more about, what's the strategy going to look like? Again, I think the Democrats are spending a lot of time really thinking critically about how they want to use this session, how they want to push through some really important legislation, but also recognizing it's still a divided government. We do have a Republican governor. So there are going to be a number of things that we pass that will likely get vetoed, but we want voters to know that Democrats are representing their interests and are pushing for the issues that they care about and the reasons that they went to vote in the first place. So we're excited. I'm going to put all those links in the chat. So if you want to get involved, please do.
And Louisa, let me just give you a boost. I'm going to say all week long, you have been going meeting after meeting after meeting. Everybody in this room, she deserves a round of applause. I'm telling you. And we're meeting with debriefing, talking with all these. I mean it. In every face we open up, there's Louisa. And it's really important because all this work around elections have to mean we really get policy. And today with the policy and politics, how important. Also, the 3 things we need to do to get it passed and the 3 amendments is going to be our 3 and free for 2026. A campaign will work around voting. We need to get our voters out. So Louisa, thank you. With that, it's exciting because we have Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger here. And I know a lot of people in the room are so excited. And hello, Congresswoman, how are you doing? Welcome, welcome.
Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be with you all.
Yes.
And
Yes,
I was appreciative of hearing Louisa's presentation because she's exactly right. We get to see not just the legislation that is going through the General Assembly ultimately to make change in Virginia, but the legislation, the constitutional amendments that will ultimately, when all goes well, come before the people. It's good to be with you all. I am currently representing Virginia's 7th district, as you said, Catherine, but I am also now declared to run for governor in Virginia. Race is 2025, so it's a ways away.
Put a woman in charge is what we're saying, friend.
It's a good song. It's a good song.
Good song.
I launched relatively early. I know some people have noticed that. And let me just walk through a couple reasons why, because it relates to the other things that are important to discuss.
Yes, go right ahead.
So I launched early because I am so proud and so grateful and enjoy representing Virginia's 7th district. And certainly all of you on the line know the work that it took to flip that seat back in 2017, 2018, hold it in 2020, hold it in 2022. And so my goal really is to make sure that I was giving ample time for someone else to run for the seat in 2024. It did not make sense to me, out of concern and thought for my constituents, to run in 2024 and then potentially decide to step down, opening the district up to a potential special election. That would not make sense. 2024 is going to be a strong year on the ballot. We're going to have congressional races, of course. Tim Kaine will be on the ballot for re-election. Then, of course, top of the ticket, President Biden's re-election. So we've got an array of candidates who are running in the 7th. I urge you all to take a look at the 7th and the 10th, where we've got some pretty competitive primaries shaping up. Take your picks and put your volunteer time behind those candidates, your dollars behind those candidates, because we really need to make sure that they all get a strong start, and that whoever comes through the primary has built out a strong start, and then whoever you were with in the primary, of course, get behind them in the general. So it's going to be an exciting year.
Right.
And then keep going, because it's 25.
Well, that's what we're saying. We're really laying this roadmap all the way to the governor's house, aren't we? And I agree. It's like sort of being an activist, and you're like, whew, we won that one. And then you get this, all of a sudden we're into these primaries, and it's going to be really interesting. So for us, we like to keep focused on really making sure that our voters are ready, that we're talking to our voters. Yep. So when you think about CD7, and of course this will relate to 10 and anywhere, I do worry about, making sure that we're really contacting not just the targeted voters, but all our voters. So what are some ideas moving in, working with Tim Kaine, working with the grassroots, of how we're going to make sure that all our voters are touched? Because what I saw in the numbers is our voters didn't come out still very strongly, as strongly as they could. So what are your ideas about how we're going to make sure, Spotsylvania being on the map, and we didn't get the Senate, for instance, there's some worry in there. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, and in Spotsylvania, the good news story there is we flipped the school board.
And they're in the room, by the way. Meadowars in the room. So yes.
Yay! And that's an incredible story that didn't make it into some of the national coverage. Yes. But actually, Spotsylvania folks on the line, I saw the vice president earlier this week, and she was congratulating me and Jennifer McClellan on the success that our great Commonwealth had. And I said, well, hold up, let me tell you one more thing. Let me tell you about a place called Spotsylvania. So was very excited to share kind of some of the fuller details of the success that we had back in November. Feels like forever ago. But the reality is that as we look towards 2024, some of the reasons, there's many reasons that I was able to flip the seat in 18 and then hold it. It's because we had strong volunteer engagement in communities where we may not, always win a particular county. And certainly of my 11 localities, I did not win them all. But it's closing the margin. It's making sure that folks who, recognize that they live in a place where perhaps there are not a lot of other Democrats know that, those votes add up and they need to cast theirs because it's going to add up with, other similar votes, other Democratic votes in other places. That comes through volunteers, that comes through postcarding, that comes through phone banking, and that's going to be incredibly vital. One of the realities is that, when you're an incumbent, people know you for better or for worse. And so the new candidates who are going to be running in the 7th, they're going to have to do a lot of work introducing themselves. We've got a great 7th District Congressional Committee. They came together in the 22 election after redistricting and really solidified as a committee. So that's an advantage there. But any work that volunteers can bring to those races, just making sure that voters on the early side know who their candidates are is incredibly important. And certainly early work, early organization matters. We're doing it. If you go to my website, abigailspanberger.com, you can sign up to volunteer. It's a marathon for us, of course, through 25. But we're doing the early stages of starting to organize volunteers and trying to get people kind of leverage to help across the state. I saw in the comments, we are not forgetting about Virginia 2. We are not forgetting about Virginia 1 either. Don't worry.
Well, I think it's a great, I think it's the really key, because I've been on calls across the nation, is looking at really voter registration, voter education. We saw a lot of that. So we'll talk about that with your team later. But what I really want to make sure too is, because we will having the presidential, I know some people on the national level are looking at what's happening in Congress and the dysfunction. You have your Mike Johnson talking to God and not really getting things done. So that challenge is there. And how do you think the impact? We know that the wars that you're dealing with, trying to get funding, the government shutdown, and on the voters' minds, and then going into this election, how are you going to message on this, and what do you see the implications on this election, what's going on in Congress or not going on? And then some of the real big challenges we're seeing, the national security issues, it's big.
Yeah, at the federal level, kind of what we're really looking at is a potential, what has been seemingly a hostile takeover of our government. We have now Speaker Johnson beholden to, as was former Speaker McCarthy, a small group of people that don't want to govern. The very true reality is that if bipartisan appropriations bills came to the floor, they would pass. We have the National Defense Authorization Act, which we have not yet passed in Congress, in the House. That got out of committee, I think it was 48-1. So one person disagreed with that bipartisan National Defense Authorization Act. That was not the bill that the speaker brought to the floor. Aid bills, be it, aid to our Ukrainian partners, our Israeli partners, support to the humanitarian need that is so profound on the ground in Gaza and the West Bank. The list goes on and on, including support to our own U.S. border.
It's needed,
Those bills, either combined or individually, would pass the House if they were brought forward. The challenge is that one person decides what comes to the floor. And at the national level, that is really the crux of it. Sounds like an understatement, and it is an understatement to say the crux of the problem. But the reality is that at this point, one person who is not focused on governance, because he is beholden to folks on the extreme right, as was his predecessor, are just choosing not to bring these bills forward. And this, a full-on appropriations bills to fund the government through the rest of the fiscal year, they'd pass with bipartisan support if they were brought forward. And talking, frankly, across certainly the 7th for me, which is what I have always done, but more broadly across the state and the rest of the country, making sure that people recognize that, of all of the great ideas that we have and all of the bills that we might be able to put forward, at the end of the day, it does come down to who is choosing to bring, who is choosing to bring the bills forward. And
Right.
the Speaker of the House comes from the majority party. And the vital importance of having, my bias, of course, is a Speaker Jeffries,
Right.
but the vital importance of having a Speaker Jeffries after the 2024 elections is the difference between, do we bring forth bipartisan bills to fund the government? Do we bring forth bipartisan bills to ensure that, the FAA is reauthorized and we're not facing, challenges at how we're literally going to put planes safely through the sky? How are we contending with the national security challenges that impact certainly the United States, but also our partners? Are we standing up to Russia? Are we trying to, facilitate the defeat of, Putin's army? Or are we kowtowing to extremist views? Like, all of this matters, and it really comes down to, at these perilous times, the majority. And I think that that's different from how it's been at various points in history, because even my short, foray into politics during my adult lifetime, there were speakers who ran the House of Representatives I didn't agree with, but they allowed for the function of government, maybe, pivoted a little bit more towards the Republican side. Yes. Fine.
No, that is a really key thing when you talk about putting certain people in charge, whether it be women, men. It's that ability that we want something to work. And I think when they see Tuberville stopping things, it's not people that really want government to work. I think the goal is to kind of destroy or deconstruct. So you have a challenge, and the challenge is, and we need to wrap up. The challenge is conveying all that to the regular voter. You just want them to come out, and whether that's such a long conversation to explain what's going on, and they get up and they go, I'm going to go vote. So we really have a lot of work to do to make sure we're speaking to them. We appreciate you being here. I know your mom is in the room, and throw a big kiss. We know we love her. So thank you, because ERA is this week, Wednesday. We'll be down there Wednesday, December 13th. So hopefully maybe we will make sure you are a big champion of women's equality, and we're still pushing that. So any help would be great.
Well, thank you to all of the advocates, the activists, and the tireless folks on the call. You have certainly made it possible for us to make incredible legislative advances in Virginia. And you've also made it absolutely possible for people like me to get elected and be able to do good work on behalf of my fellow Virginians. So thank you for all that you all do. I know I am grateful, and I speak for so many of my colleagues, particularly the women, who are grateful for all of the work and advocacy that you all do.
Yeah, I could talk all day, because you make me think of Brat and Get Out of My Grill. I love it. So that's Inside Talk. So thank you very much. And I know that we'll be in contact with you. People keep coming into the room because they're so excited to hear from you. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your to be brave in these times and representing us. Thank you so much.
And thank you for always keeping a meeting running on time.
Yeah, we're trying to get going. See you later. Bye-bye, Abigail.
Bye.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Oh my gosh, that was really good. I could really get deeper into policy there, but it is what it is. So I want to, keeping in that thread, I'm sure that we are excited to welcome Dr. Bonnie Stabile here, founder and director of the Gender and Policy Center at the Schar Policy and Government Center at Schar at George Mason University. Hello, Bonnie. How are you doing?
Hey, great. It's great to be here and great to see you today.
Well, I want to say you're author. You've done many publications and books and writings, but the one that caught our eye was The Woman, Power, and Rape Culture. What a name. What a book. And I'm just wanted to get right into it with you, and everything you're hearing, the stories you see, women that are running. This is your sweet spot of policy, politics, and gender. So let's talk about that. Let's just go right into what the GAP Center does, the Gender and Policy Center, and why that was necessary. Give us some of that background, and then let's get into what that variable of gender means.
Great. Yeah. So in 2017, I founded the center at the Schar School of Policy and Government. And I was really delighted that the school was in support of when we got the naming gift from Dwight Schar for the school. They asked, what do you think would be important initiatives that we should focus on as a School of Policy and Government, and they supported the Gender and Policy Center proposal. So I was thrilled about that, and we really are trying to bring attention to disparities where women are underrepresented in leadership positions, but also disparities in policy outcomes, where sometimes we can see in too many instances that we can predict outcomes for people in populations based on their race or gender, and that's not how public service is supposed to work, right? We're supposed to be treated equally under the law. So we know that there are a lot of things that women suffer more greatly from: student loan debt, proneness to violence, a lack of sufficient wage, so there's so many different areas, health, so that warrant our investigation. So there's plenty of stuff that has, as you said, not been adequately addressed thus far. So trying to bring attention to those studies.
No, I know. And it is sort of like endless, really, what you can get into. So in making sure, like when we talk about this book that you do have up and the implications of when you talk about rape culture, what brought you to writing this book in general? Like even when you're hearing women that are running for office, some of the challenges they have, or what do you give us the genesis of the book, the project, the research, and especially why it matters today?
Yes. Well, I mean, I keep saying I didn't want to write a book with the term rape culture in the title, but I came to that because I started to see it as necessary. So I was studying the issue of campus sexual assault in 2015. And as I started learning more and more about sexual violence and the burdens that are associated with that, and in all its forms, from harassment through assault and rape, I started to see that as one of the major categories of burdens that prevent women from being able to get into leadership roles or to maintain their jobs, right? It's just, as a category, there are lots of things that historically have held women back legally and otherwise, but I just thought it was worth putting a lens on, showing how when women are subjected to these threats and they're inadequately addressed through laws and policy, that it creates impediments along their career trajectories and in their educational trajectories, and that is one of the reasons that we see women less well represented in positions of power. And then, of course, it's a vicious circle, because when there are fewer women at the table, so to speak, or in leadership positions, they don't see the problems. I think about the case of that was back in the news again, but that Long Island girl, Gabby Petito, who was murdered by her boyfriend in 2021. The fact is that she had an encounter with law enforcement where, if they had been adequately informed about domestic violence and its manifestations, there could have been a different outcome. I'm not sure her life could have been saved, but that was an inflection point, or a touch point where the state troopers that encountered this couple that were witnessed having some kind of physical altercation, they actually said, well, gosh, we don't know who's at fault, or she could be the aggressor here. And all the signs are known by the experts but weren't known by them. And that's the frontline responders, the street level bureaucrats, as the academics like to call them. We could do so much better if people were better informed who are creating and carrying out policy. And one critical way to do that would be to have more women's voices represented. I mean, Tarana Burke, who innovated the Me Too moniker, she came up with that because she was just horrified by the amount of young women who experience sexual violence in their lives. And, that story has such a common refrain, and the numbers are so incredibly high. And yet the term rape culture has to do with the inadequacy of society's response, both legally and culturally, right? That if this epidemic of violence against women and sexual violence is persisting, it must mean that we're not doing enough to address it. And why is that? And how do we go about that?
No, and then the intersection, and when I think about rape culture, I mean, the term that settles with me is like the patriarchal system, right? Where we know all the different elements that hold that table up. We have the anti-Black racism. We have, we see what we're doing right now. We see the rise of theocracy and religion. All these things are intertwined. And then women's rights on that, and discrimination and sexism and this thing we call patriarchy that we see when we talk about a rape culture. And I think any woman in this room, we don't really think about that every day in those terms, but when we walk out the door, we certainly think about where we're going just subconsciously. The culture is out there and it has these restrictions on us, right? Where we're driving, where we are, what time it is, how we walk in and out of a mall even. Those little controls are controls everywhere, right? Like if you really investigate, if you want to get outside of your lane, you will feel that on Twitter. You run for office, you will be attacked, right? So as soon as if you stay in your lane, maybe that safe lane, but women, when they go outside, boy, it could be really a scary place. You know, those controls, you know what I mean?
Well, it can be quite punishing. And one chapter in the book is an analysis of rhetorical analysis of, I actually used Trump's tweets to categorize them based on, because I mean, he was kind of offensive to everybody in the political process, but it had particular resonance for women and people of color, because when stereotypes and tropes are raised that people tend to culturally and historically believe, it has a lot more impact in holding them back. So, I mean, in the chapter on presidential rhetoric, I created a mnemonic device which spells out the word silent, and it, you know, the words stand for stature, intelligence, looks, emotional state, necessary qualifications, and trustworthiness, because these are all areas where women are found to be inadequately up to the task in many ways, right? Women are so emotional, women are hysterical, you know, the traditional words that we know about. But Mara, when you talked about viability, I was like, oh, that would be perfect, right? Women aren't seen as viable candidates. They're not seen as you know, they're not seen as competent or as capable when they run. So I think I wrote that because it sort of emerged in my thinking when I was looking at it, but it also is a mechanism of holding women back because they don't look like the normative candidate. And that's changing. I mean, as all the fantastic women here are showing, right? Now we have pictures in our head of what women leaders look like, but we still haven't come anywhere near a proportional representation of women in the public sphere. And I think that a lot of the existing laws and policies continue to be inadequate, like the red flag laws that you mentioned. There, you know, we can wave red flags, but if people aren't seeing them, right? You know, sometimes people need to be acculturated to seeing them, and women are seeing them because in the case of my topical area in the book, women have experienced sexual violence at a much higher rate than men, although men do experience it too. But there's a certain formulaic thing that women are quite well familiar with. So it makes sense to them. They can testify and create policy that's responsive in an appropriate way, whereas a whole class of people that have not experienced that life, experience, or just don't see it. They're not seeing the waving of the red flags.
Yeah. Well, when millions of women stood up to march after the election in 2016, I think we did see these flags, and you see this slog where we're going to theocracy and all these kind of nightmarish things that we see going on. But so yes, we are answering that call. Just one more time for that, go through silent again, just slower, just spell it out for us because we're running up to time. I just wanted to make sure everybody heard you on those.
Sure.
I love it.
The S stands for stature and stamina. Okay. I is for intelligence. L is for looks.
Mm-hmm.
E is for emotional state. N is for necessary qualifications. I mean, I was squeezing on that one,
Right.
And T is for trustworthiness. And each one has whole, bunches of words, dozens of words that are used to that sort of
silence women.
Yes, silence women by picking code words in those categories that conjure ideas of women as being, not appropriate for holding powerful positions.
Right, to be scared off. For instance, we've seen that happen. I've seen candidates step down because of just then the threats against them and the attacks, and they're real and they're scary. So that is true. So for just a general wrap up, because I hope you can stay a few minutes in the after chat and we can get more deep into it. What are some key takeaways from your book, from what you've heard today with the policy, politics, and gender, and that variable that you think is very important, gender, in your work that you'd like to make sure everybody hears?
Well, I think that the work that you're all doing really exemplifies what can people do. People always want
What
to
can
know
they
what
do?
can people do. Um, of course, my focus is on policy and how very important it is, because that codifies in law and carries, how it's carried out, what we can actually do to address these problems. But it's very much this circle of you have to have women in positions of power to be able to see that. So to the extent that women can mentor and bring along and support each other, that's critically important. We need to vote and encourage people to vote. We need to educate people and inform ourselves and others so we understand the nuances of these issues, and can have better dialogue about them in the public. And the activism that women such as those in the room here today are doing, all these things are necessary in order to be part of the policy process and change.
Yeah, I agree. And the male allies that we have around us and support, I think, is really important, especially when mentoring is important and seating those seats and helping women get into those. I think when I look at what Mara has done and the change that she's made, that innovation she's brought, and especially the stuff that you've developed at the college, at the Mason level, at the college level, and those implications academically are just so important. So thank you, Bonnie. Thank you for being here. And I hope you're staying for the after chat a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks.
Oh, okay,
Thanks so much
awesome.
for having me.
Yeah, I don't have to. Yeah, I don't have to squeeze any shoulders today to get people to stay. So for now, let's do a little wrap up. I'm just so excited. I want to thank our guests for coming today. We'll just start out of the gate with Abigail Spanberger. So what are your takeaways on hearing from the Congresswoman?
So I loved hearing from Abigail. I think she gave us a little civics lesson today in terms of how stuff happens. And I think that is probably a strategy that we can think about, which is just really sort of understanding the basic details of what's happening. If we have one person who refuses to bring a bill to the floor, that means that good work can't get done. So I'm excited about that because that means we're going to start naming those people. So I was happy for our civics lesson today from Abigail.
And it is, and what for me too, my takeaway is her sweet spot is always being getting shit done, getting things done, just like Mara Elliott, same thing. But when you have a broken system and they're breaking it purposely, I think the frustration is when we want to get things done. This is a pretty big lift, in Congress that we have right now, and from government shutdowns. And so, having somebody in charge that's really brave, that's really willing to fight really hard, I'm glad for that. So I also want to say, and our next guest talking about reducing gun violence, and we've seen it in the schools. We've seen what's happening every day. Just the other day, we had somebody that fit Mara Elliott's profile. Was a domestic person that created the red flag was there and then went out and shot the whole family. This is something that she has brought. So thank you to San Diego City Attorney Mara Elliott. What are some takeaways on what you heard from her? I have some.
So you just talked about a lot of them, but what I walked away with were things that can stay with me. One is courage. So it's not easy to decide you're going to do this. Right. So have courage. And focus on the issues that you care about, because those are the ones that you will be more passionate. And if you care about those issues and you're thinking about how you would think about them or want to see them done, then it's easier to get people to come along with you. And she's got some pretty significant statistics behind her to show that it works.
Yeah. I think some of the things that I wrote down, staying true to who you are, not quitting, not really staying in it, even when people maybe try to intimidate you, staying in this, that really staying true to who you are, and then taking those chances to see if, why don't we try this? And we're like that too. We're innovative.
Yeah, right? I think that's absolutely true. And I go back to Abigail once more to say, when I think about that, it really is. People are frustrated when stuff doesn't get done, but they're also frustrated because they don't know how it gets done. So once you start to provide, and this is with Mara as well as Abigail, once you start providing, information on how it gets done, then it makes you think differently about what your impact can be when you become part of the process.
Yeah, and Professor Bonnie Stabile, what are your thoughts on that? What you heard while I was talking that hit you?
Yeah, there were a lot of things that hit me having that conversation because honestly, it made me think very specifically about how these things affect women, especially when you're not in the room, especially the culture of rape, especially how we think about it and how we need others to think about it. And I hope that we get a chance to talk in the after chat, because I also think about how this relates to abortion and women's options in terms of how we're treated in those spaces, especially in cases of rape. And
Yes.
so I want to hear more from Dr. Stabile about that and some of the cases that are in the news right now that relate to what's happened in rape and what's happened in just medical issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think being willing to think that, and what she started to be able to be innovative, to start this gap center and to say that women and their issues are worthy of study, and then understanding policy, and really the research around that. And that's where we get a lot of impact on, the politics even. But, and I'll say the last thing about what I heard is that what we're doing in this room really matters, and that to really make the change is to keep, I see that Andrea Miller, it was in the room talking about it too. There's a lot of people in this room doing a lot of work on policy and to get people elected, and people that care about domestic abuse or working on the advocacy, the issues around women's issues. So we're thankful for that. So that was super. So I want to say that we're, again, some show business we always like to get to make sure that we are ending the show. Hopefully you can stay for the after chat. We're going to have a good time talking to some of the guests that can stay, and we will open when you get to the other side. We will make sure questions first go to the guests, and then we'll open the floor to everybody else. So hopefully have your questions ready. So that would be great. And also get ready for the ERA next Wednesday, December 13th, and support the show. Don't forget about us.
Yeah, I was going to say we have a new Patreon. We have Susan Labandabar, who is now a new
Susan. Oh, I can't wait to talk. I can talk all day, so I'm going to get to the other side because I want to talk about how we're going to be working with women across the nation. And in January, we'll talk more about that. So yes, please. Thank you, Susan. Thank you for supporting us. We really appreciate it. Thank you to the team that's here today. And it's 1:03. Let's get to the other side and let's get it talking about what we heard today.